Hello, and welcome to today's webinar on the inventory adjustment processes and the inventory cycle counting processes. Today we will cover the inventory adjustment processes, the inventory cycle count process, count journals and how they're used. We will do counting inventory using your RF scanners. We'll then discuss how to resolve count variances. And then we will finalize our inventory cycle counts. So we're going to start today by discussing the inventory adjustment process. The inventory adjustment process starts at delivery. So the delivery arrives at your agency. You need to make sure that you receive the order in full in the system with the truck driver present. If there are no issues with the order, both you and the truck driver will sign off on the paperwork and everything is good. But if there are issues with the order, once you have completely received it into the system with the driver present, you will then use your RF scanner to transfer the shortage items or the damaged items to quarantine. You'll print 2 copies of the inventory adjustment form from the enterprise portal. You and the driver will sign both. You'll keep a copy, the driver will keep a copy, and this will complete your process. For short shipments, as we said, your transfer orders have to be received in full with the truck driver present, and this includes short shipped or damaged items. So you're going to receive the order in full. You're going to note any short shipped items on the carrier's paperwork. You will then transfer the items into quarantine using your RF scanner while the truck driver is still there. You need to remember when you transfer to quarantine for short shipped products, the entire case is missing. So make sure that when you transfer the product, you transfer the full case worth quantity. So if you're doing it in bottles, it needs to be the total amount of bottles in that case, not just one. Once you're done, you then will print the inventory adjustment form from the enterprise portal. You and the driver will both sign it, and you will each keep a signed copy. Now, should the truck driver leave before you have been able to receive in the transfer order completely, you need to contact the LESC right away and let them know. Because a couple things happen whenever there's a shortage upon receipt. There are some investigations done. The first thing they're going to look at is they're going to look back at the distribution center and see if by chance the missing cases were left on the dock. That's the first place they look. The next place they're going to look is see if by chance those missing cases were left on the truck, because there were multiple orders on the truck. Gee, did they leave the cases on the truck? Now, one final thing they'll do is the next time your auditor is in, they will cycle count that item, and they will see if you're over on the item, that may be the missing cases right there. But if the cases are not found at the distribution center, not found on the truck, and not found in your agency, and you have not contacted the LESC to let them know that the truck driver left before you could complete the receipt in the system, you may get charged for the product. So you need to cover yourself and call the LESC immediately if the truck driver does not stay for you to completely receive in the delivery. Now, damages, depending on how the product was damaged, they're handled a little bit differently. Now, damages noticed during receiving time are handled very similarly to a shortage. You're going to receive the damaged product in full using the RF scanner. So you receive that whole transfer order in full. You're going to note the damages on the carrier's paperwork, and you're going to transfer the product to quarantine using your RF scanner. And then you're going to print out the inventory adjustment form with the driver there, and you will both sign off on it. Now, in the case of damages, you only need to transfer the actual damaged bottles into quarantine. You don't have to transfer the entire case unless the entire case was damaged. Now, what happens or how do you handle if damages aren't noticed until afterwards? So let's say 3 weeks after you receive the order, you're restocking shelves, you open up a case, and you notice damage at that time. You need to go ahead and transfer those damages to quarantine using your RF scanner, and you're just going to make a notation on the inventory adjustment form for your auditor to indicate that it was concealed damage and you didn't notice it until like 3 weeks later when you were restocking the shelves. Now, damage or loss by an agency, and this would be if you or one of your employees actually damages, breaks a bottle. That's handled a little bit differently, and it's actually handled through the cycle counting process that we'll discuss in a little bit. So, for example, if you had 40 bottles of an item and you had an employee break 2 of them, when you went to do the cycle count on that item, you're only going to count good inventory. You're not going to count damaged inventory. So you would only enter your cycle count quantity as 38 bottles. That would take the 2 damaged bottles out of inventory when you finalized that count and posted the journal. Because you're not doing a transfer to quarantine, you do not have an inventory adjustment form, and one is not created. Now, damage lost by a customer is handled more similarly to damage upon receipt. So if a customer is responsible for loss or damage, you're going to do a transfer to quarantine on the RF scanner, print out the inventory adjustment form, have the customer sign off on it, and you're going to have that form there available for the auditor when they come in. If your customer doesn't stay or refuses to sign the form, just make that notation on the inventory adjustment form for the auditor. Now, overages. Overages are defined as items that show up at delivery time that you didn't order or it's not marked as shipped on the transfer order. In that case, you need to refuse that product, refuse it back to the driver. But you want to make sure that you have documented that you have refused the product. So in that case, this is the only time it's acceptable to use the carrier OS&D form. And you're going to do this prior to the driver leaving. He will have an OS&D form to fill out. You document the TO number, the item code, the quantity. Both you and the driver sign off on it, and you refuse the cases back to the driver. Do not refuse cases and not have it documented on an OS&D form. There's no type of transfer to do. There's no inventory adjustment form because you've done nothing in the system. So now we're going to go ahead and move on to the inventory cycle count process. The inventory cycle count process starts by creating a count journal in the enterprise portal. In order to do cycle counts, you have to create a count journal first in the enterprise portal. And you'll see that that's the first thing when you actually go in to do the counts on the RF scanner. First thing it's going to ask you for is the count journal. So you have to create that count journal first in the enterprise portal. Then you will actually do counts using your RF scanner, and we'll show you how you can count product in the front on your shelves and bottles and actually count inventory in your back in your stockroom in cases. And the system will keep track of it and add it together for you. Once you've done your initial counts, you're going to have variances, and you may decide that through doing investigation, you found some missing bottles, or gee, you're not really over on the item, but you have a need to change some of the counts. We'll show you how to modify your counts using the RF scanner, and this changes the total counted in the system. Then once you're done with all of that, to complete the inventory, complete the cycle count, you actually have to post the count journal. You're not done until you post the count journal, and you need to make sure that you do it that same day, actually as soon as you complete your counting and rectify any of your variances. You're going to want to post that count journal. The final thing is you'll run the inventory audit report, and that will be for your auditor, and it is a record of everything that you counted and what your results were. So, the guidelines around doing inventory cycle counting. First of all, agency inventories have to be counted every 30 days or every calendar month. Now, all of your inventory doesn't have to be counted at the same time. That's what a cycle count is. A cycle count is a means of dividing up your inventory into more manageable chunks, so it's not as much of a disruption to your business. So you'll count certain items on a particular day, or you'll have a list of items that you're going to count this week, another list the next week. Couple rules, though, to keep in mind. First of all, your previous day's sales must have successfully posted before you can start cycle counting. So you need to run your daily sales report to make sure that the previous day's sales have posted. The second thing is no sales can be occurring on the items that you are counting until you post the count journal and finalize. This really comes into play when you're trying to rectify any variances that you have. So let's say I do an initial count and I notice that I'm off on an item, but I've been selling the product off the shelf in the meantime. When I go back to do recounts, I'm going to be off because product has been sold already. So you need to make sure that no sales are occurring on the items that you are counting while you are counting them until you post the count journal. Once you have posted the journal, you are free to go ahead and resume sales on those items. You also need to make sure before you start that all products are received in the system. Anything you have inventory on hand in-house, you need to make sure that you have received that product in the system. So if you had a pending agency-to-agency transfer come in, make sure you've completed it and received it in the system. So inventory can be counted in multiple ways. You can count by specific individual products. You can count by product categories. You may organize your cycle counts and organize your plan by product categories, or you can decide to count everything all at once. Some smaller agencies are saying this is a good plan for them, that once a month on a Sunday they're just going to count everything, and that is acceptable. We're just offering cycle counting as a means to not have this be as much of a disruption to your business. So all inventory of a specific item on hand has to be counted on the same count journal on the same day. So that means if I count bottles in the front on the shelves, if I have any of that product in inventory anywhere else in my store, whether it be in the back storage area, behind the counter, on a display, I need to make sure all of that product gets counted that same day on that same count journal. So the best cycle counting programs have a plan. First of all, decide which day of the week and time is best for you for counting. The state is not going to specify that you must do your counts on Wednesdays. You decide what works best for you and use that as your plan. You're going to want to plan out which items you're going to count every week so that at the end of the 30 days or the calendar month, you've covered all of the items that you have at your agency. So I know some agencies actually have a monthly plan that they designate in week 1, here are the items I am counting. Week 2, here are the items I'm counting. And they do that so that at the end of the calendar month, they have hit every item and counted it at least once. Something to keep in mind is that your inventory levels are typically the lowest the day before your weekly replenishment order is delivered to you and received. So you might want to consider doing counts on that day because you'd have the least amount of inventory to count. Conversely, You don't want to do a cycle count on the day that your replenishment order is being received. So let's talk about count journals. They're used to conduct a physical inventory or cycle count, and think of them as an electronic document for capturing all of the counts that you're doing. This is the first thing that you're going to do to kick off your counts, and you create them in the enterprise portal. Now, when you create the count journal, you do not need to add items to the journal manually at that time. In fact, we recommend that you don't. The first time that you actually complete a count using your RF scanner, that will automatically add it to the journal for you. So if you do add an item on the enterprise portal, it forces you to count that item. This gives you a lot more flexibility, so just do not add items manually into the count journal. Okay, so now we're going to go into our first demonstration, and we're going to come on the enterprise portal, and under the Retail tab, we're going to come in the area called Stock Counts. Now, some people have asked, can I have multiple count journals out there? Yes, you can, but there's a danger to doing that. You need to make sure that you choose a count journal and you stick with it for the counts for that particular day. If you have multiple count journals out there, you run the danger and you run the risk of putting some counts in one journal and some counts in another. So you need to be very careful. So to create a new count journal, you're going to click the little yellow sun up here on the left called New Stock Count. And when it comes to the description page here, you can leave it blank, and I'll show you on the next screen what the system will auto default in, or you can put a description in there. So you may want to put vodkas March 2nd, 2018. So I know that those are the vodkas that I counted on March 2nd of 2018. If you choose not to put a description in, just click the Continue button. And you're now going to get this screen that defaults in the words Agency Count and your user ID number. This is the section down here where we're saying do not add the items in. So to create my count journal, all I'm going to do at this point is save and close. And you're going to see that my count journal popped up on the bottom here. And that's all it takes to create a count journal. So moving on, let's now talk about how you do the actual counts. Your counts are going to be done using your RF scanner. And we said your entire inventory at your agency has to be counted every 30 days or calendar month. And cycle counting is a means to spread this out over the period so you don't have to do it all at once. Although a full physical inventory is also an option. You need to make sure that all inventory for a specific item has to be counted on the same count journal on the same day. So you can actually count the bottles that you have in shelves. You can count them up in bottles. Then you can go back to your storage room, count what's back there in cases, and the system will add those together for you. You don't have to move back and forth counting bottles of an item in the front and run in the back and then count the cases. You can count any of the items you're going to count up front, enter all those, then go in the back, enter what's in the back in cases, and I'll show you how you change between case count and bottle counts on your RF scanners. But once again, make sure there's no sales activity occurring on the items you are counting until you finalize and post the count journal. So once you complete your counts and you finalize and post that count journal, then you are free to resume sales on those items. So now let's get into actually doing counts on the RF scanner. Okay, so I'm going to start by logging in. And I'll put in my password. So when I come into the first screen here, I'm going to use the option number 6, Case Bottle Count. And you can see here now it's asking me for my journal ID. If I press F1 on my RF scanner, it shows me all of my open journals. I'm going to use Journal 347 for my counts today. If you get prompted for the warehouse, this is your 5-digit agency number. Just enter it, and now you're off and running. So what it wants you to do is you tell me what you're counting. I'm going to say that I'm starting in the front. I'm going to scan the first barcode of the first item I want to count. So I'm scanning the barcode. If you get prompted for a location, you are going to put S as in Sam, or your stock location. You are only counting good inventory. You are not counting your quarantine. So now it comes into, and in this case, I am counting bottles in the front. So we're going to do my first item, and we're going to count some bottles in the front, and I'm going to say I found 9. Now I can move on to my next item, and I can say I counted 5 bottles of that. Count that, and I'm going to count So let's say that's all that I'm going to count. You notice when I first came in here, it said my current unit of measure was bottle mode. So every time I come into case bottle count, it automatically defaults me into bottle mode. But I'm done counting the bottles up front. I'd like to start counting cases in back. So it tells me to F6 to change my unit of measure. On your RF scanners, you're not going to see a button that says F6. But to do an F6, you press the orange key that's on the left side of the keypad once. That will light up the yellow button on the bottom of your RF scanner. You then press the E key once, and then you press the orange key one more time and the yellow light will come off. What will happen is you will see that this current unit of measure bottle mode will change, and it will say current unit of measure case mode. So now let's say I finished counting everything up front. Now I'm in the back and I'm in the stock room, and I want to count what I have in inventory back there. So let's scan the first item. So that was the first item I counted in front, but now I'm in case mode, and it actually tells me how many bottles are in a case. So let's say I'm going to count 2 cases this time. So now I'm going to count my next item. I'll say I only had 1 case of that. And let's count one more item in the back. And on this one, I'm going to count 2 back there. So at this point, I'm going to say I did my initial counts. These were the only items I'm counting today, and I'm done doing my initial counts. So we're going to go back, and we're going to see how do we move on. What do we do next? So now we want to know, we've done our initial counts, and you could see when we did our counts that there was no answer given to the counter. He wasn't told how many cases or how many bottles of an item are on hand in the system. He was told to go out there and count and tell us what he found. That's something called a blind count. So now we have the opportunity, we're going to say we did our initial counts, we looked everywhere we knew in our agency product was. We're going to take all the counts we entered, and we want to see how they compare to what shows as on hand in the system. So as we did those counts, the count journal got populated. And what we're going to do next is we're going to go back into that count journal. We're going to take a look, and it will show us the items we counted, what the on-hand inventory was for each of those items, and it still is because we haven't changed anything yet, and what we actually counted. It'll then show us if we have a variance. So are we over? Are we under? Are we right on the money on the item? So depending on what the variance is, we may have some additional work to do. First of all, if there's product missing. So if there's product missing, we want to try and find it. The first thing is you want to investigate, are there any other additional storage areas in your agency where that product could be? So let's say one of your best customers is coming in at 4 p.m. today, and he wants 2 bottles of Jim Beam. And you put those 2 bottles of Jim Beam behind the counter so that they were there. You didn't sell them. You had the product when he showed up. But you forgot that you had those bottles behind the shelves. So that may be an area that you look at for missing bottles. Do you have anything sort of pulled out for a customer and just put behind the shelves for quick access when they come in? Another area to consider are product displays. So very often, vendors will come in, they'll create end-of-aisle displays. There's probably a lot going on for St. Patrick's Day. So vendor comes in, uses inventory to create this end-of-item display. The product on those displays is actually part of your on-hand inventory. So if any of that product is one of the items that you're counting that particular day, you need to make sure you count any inventory on that display. The third area to consider for those of you who are wholesalers are your open wholesale orders. So unless you have started picking an order, so let's say you have a large wholesale customer, gives you the order on Monday, not going to pick it up until Thursday, but you're doing your cycle counts on Wednesday. It's a big order. You started picking it already and staging it in your back stock room. If you do not use the picking process in the system on the wholesale terminal, and remember the picking process is a 2-step process. What it does is you have to create a pick list on the wholesale terminal and then either pick using your RF scanner or mark it as picked in the wholesale terminal. Doing that picking process on the wholesale terminal actually removes it from inventory. But if you are not using the picking process on the wholesale terminal, and we did say that was optional, and you have not invoiced the order yet, if you have physically picked the product and it's sitting staged in the back of your agency, that product is on hand and you need to count it as part of the inventory if any of those items are on those wholesale orders. So you will want to reference your pending wholesale report to know if you have any of the products on there. So you also need to investigate overages because you guys aren't making the product. So an overage is not necessarily a good thing. A couple things to consider. You could have an overage by scanning the wrong item. So let's say you were counting product on the shelves. You scanned one barcode but actually counted the product next to it. That would be one way you could have an overage. Also, be careful when you enter the inventory in your back stockroom. I showed you how to do it using case mode. If you use bottle mode, you want to make sure that you're entering the right case count. So let's say that I had left myself in bottle mode to go in the back to count my product. And I entered my item 0007B. And I'm like, oh, I know this is 12 per case, so I enter a 12. Well, it's really 6 per case. So I've just created an overage of 6 bottles by doing that entry. The other thing to consider too is the cases that you have in the back in storage may not be full. You may have started restocking your shelves and everything wouldn't fit out there. So you start restocking the shelves, but gee, I have 3 bottles that won't fit. I left them in the case because that's going to protect them in storage in the back. But when I go to do my counts, I need to realize that that case is not full. So I would not want to count that as a full case. I'd want to count it as the actual bottles that are in there. So once I've done my investigation, I've gone out, I figured out where the missing product was, and I've figured out how my overages are. I need to change some of my counts in the system. And you can do this by using the Modify Count option on the RF scanner. What Modify Count does, it replaces the count completely for that particular item. It doesn't add to anything that you have, it replaces the count for that item. So as an example here, we went through, we did our initial counts for item 19B. On hand said I should have 18. My initial counts, I only had 15, so I was short 3 bottles. Well, I went and did investigation, and sure enough, I had 2 bottles of this behind the counter for a customer coming in later that day. So I need to change my total count on this item from 15 to 17. So I'm going to use the Modify Count option on my RF scanner, and I'm going to enter a total of 17 bottles. And when I go back into the Enterprise portal then, I can see that my counted quantity has changed, and now my variance is only 1 bottle. Okay, so we're going to start by, first of all, we're going to go into the Enterprise portal, and we're going to go into my count journal 347. And this is everything that I counted. So I actually didn't do too bad. My item 7B, I'm over 2. Item 12B, I'm over 1. And I actually have 2 items that I'm right on the money on. So I'm doing really well. Well, I'm going to go out, I'm going to look at some investigation, and nah, I'm really not over 2 on 7B. I'm actually, the count is not 21. The count is 18. I'm actually short a bottle. And on 12B, where I was over 1, I found an additional bottle, and so my count should be 12. So I'm going to go out, I've done my investigation, but now I need to change those counts. So I'm going to close out of the journal, come back into my RF scanner, and now I'm going to use option number 8, Modify Count. Once again, it asks me for my journal ID, and because I have multiple journals out here, it's very important that I choose the right one. I'm using journal 347. So the first thing it's going to ask me for is the item code. So the first item I want to do a recount on was item 7B. And when I did my recounts, there's really 18 bottles out there. And the second item I'm going to recount, there's really 12 bottles out there. So I'm going to come out of this, come back to my main menu. And what I'm going to show you, now I'm going to go back into the count journal, and you're going to see that the numbers have changed. So now I'm 1 short on this, and I'm 2 over on this item. And the other items I didn't touch, so the counts didn't change. One final thing, though, before I finalize my count, I want to zero count some items. So let's say I had a couple items that were on my list to count today, and when I went to do the counts, I just didn't find anything. There wasn't anything out there. So what I want to do is I want to enter them as a 0 count. So this is the only time that you're going to come in here and use the add item. You're not going to use add items. You're going to use the new button, and you will add the items to the count. So I'm going to start with my item 0059B. And when I enter it, it tells me I should have had 6 on hand, but I counted 0. And I'm going to click the Save button. And that is done. And at this point, if there's anything else that I needed to count, I would have added it in at this point. I'm done with my counts though, so I am going to submit to complete my counts, and I'm going to move on. And I only click the submit after I've added my zero count items, and I will do that at the very end. Okay, so we're almost done, but we're not quite done. You're not done with your cycle count until you post the count journal. So what posting the count journal will do is it will update the inventory to the counted quantities for each of the products. But once you post a count journal, you cannot make any more changes. You'll see that the count journal actually disappears from your screen, so there's no way to get back into it. People ask, well, what happens if I did a count, I was 2 bottles short, I post the count journal, and 5 minutes later I locate those 2 bottles. In that case, what you need to do is just create a new count journal for just that one item. You'll create a count journal, do the RF scanner, put the new total correct amount in, and post the count journal. And that new post count journal will replace the other one. So once you post a count journal, your on-hand inventory quantities will get updated, your variances will get moved in the system to the quarantine warehouse, and the auditors will reconcile those. So final step, let's go into posting a count journal. So we're going to come back in. We're going to go into our journal. We have everything completed in here. And so now all I need to do is click the post button. And you will see that it's loading. And when I come back, Journal 347 has disappeared from my screen. There's no way that I could make a change if I wanted to. So let's talk about some of the inventory reports. There's a couple inventory reports that are directly affected by doing cycle counts. The first is the inventory audit report. And this report is going to display all your counts that were entered from the RF scanner. It also displays the items that I zero counted. And once the journal is posted, it displays all the counts and variances. This report can also be run once you have done your initial counts and you have variances out there. A recent enhancement will allow you to go ahead and run that report and use that as a tool as you're working on resolving variances. So you can run it prior to posting. The agency inventory report then is a snapshot of your current inventory at the time that the report is run. That report gets updated anytime you complete and finalize a receipt and anytime you post a count journal. So we will take a look at some of the items that we counted and we'll see that they have changed on that report. Okay, so we're going to go back to the Enterprise portal for our reports. The first one is the inventory audit report. And when you run the inventory audit report, you run it by journal. And here's my journal 347 that we just used. I select it and I view the report. Now, at the top here, you can see where it says variance with a checkbox. If I had clicked this box here, it only would have displayed those items that had variances. So it would not display the items that I was dead on the money here. When I run this report and save it for the auditors, you want to run it wide open because this becomes my record that I am cycle counting. This is a record of what I've actually done. I want to get credit for having counted items that I was right on. But it shows me those items that have variances as well, and I can see it shows me the item that had a zero count. So this is really the record of that particular cycle count of everything I did. The other report to take a look at is the agency inventory report. And if we look at a couple items here, we had some items that we changed some inventories on. So we're going to take a look at 7B. We actually changed the inventory to 18. 12B, we changed the inventory to 12. And we're also going to take a look at 59B, which we zero counted. So we want to take a look at the items in particular. We're going to look at the ones that had changes to them. So the agency inventory report. This report auto runs for you. So you click on the report and it's going to run and it's going to show me everything at my agency. Now, a couple things to note with this report. Now, first of all, let's look at the items we changed. So item 7B, when we started, we had 19 on hand, but we only counted 18. When we posted the count journal, that 18 now shows up on my agency inventory report. Item 12B, we counted 12, and that now shows. And item 59B shows here with the zero count. Now, what shows up on this report is any item that you have on-hand inventory and or you have a minimum set. So on item 59B, I zero counted that item. If this had had a zero minimum on it, the item 59B would have disappeared from this report completely. But because there was a minimum on the item of 4, even though I zero counted and there's no inventory on hand anymore, it still shows up on the report. So at this point, this ends the webinar on inventory adjustment processes and the inventory cycle count process. If you have questions or issues as you're doing cycle counting or inventory adjustments, please contact the LESC and they can give you assistance on any of the issues that you may have. Thank you very much for joining today's webinar. Take care.